Hi everyone, my name's Chad Lefebvre, and I'm doing my first video post as I'm going to start doing a lot of video blogging and commentary as part of my personal website, which you're all invited to check out my page where I'll be posting these videos regularly. My personal website, just a real high level, is really going to be an articulation of different observations, reflections and meditations that I've had about many different topics, including what it means to be human, how our brains work. We're going to look into neuroscience and neuropsychology and how we can apply that to our own lives. I'm going to tackle a bunch of different issues as they come up that we can apply this to. And it's sort of an extension to some of the work that I'm already doing in my workshop group, The Most Important Conversations. Today what I want to talk about is the nature of ideas, as I thought it would be a really great first post to kind of get to the foundational level or the root of the human experience, which is ultimately the nature of ideas. Ideas are actually the only thing that ultimately exists. If you think about it, everything that has ever existed actually started as an idea at some point. And that idea led to something being created. If you think about it, cars, planes, houses, how we grow our food, phones, clothes, what we do for entertainment, there's nothing that fundamentally exists that we experience as real that didn't first exist in someone else's mind as a possibility. As far as we know, ideas only exist in the minds of sentient beings. So as humans, it's the world of ideas that frame and set the context for what we experience as real. If everything began as an idea, and that idea then became manifested into some physical, tangible thing we experience as real, then the only thing that ultimately exists are ideas. This makes reality entirely a function of our world of ideas on our head. And our ideas create a perception that we then experience as real. So I'll say that again. Essentially, reality is entirely a function of our ideas, which then creates the perception that we experience as real. Perception then is our experience of reality. There is no experience. We don't experience any other reality outside of that which we perceive. There is no experience of reality that you can have as a human being that isn't entirely reliant on your brain's processing of external information that you then unconsciously frame through the context of your ideas that pop up into your mind quite randomly about what this external information you have gathered means. I'll say that again. There's no experience of reality that you can have as a human being that isn't entirely reliant on your brain's processing of external information that then is filtered through the context of your ideas and the meaning you layer on top. So perception is the process of layering meaning on an otherwise meaningless set of occurrences that we call what we experience as real, or our lives. And what we know from neuroscience now is that this happens unconsciously in about 1.7 to 2.2 seconds. In other words, before you even realize that you are living inside of a perception of your own making, that you believe is real, and that you then make choices based on that perception of your own creation, before you even realize that you've already unconsciously accepted that process and your conscious realization of what you're perceiving as the real thing, as something you then need to take action around. So, for example, two people can be sitting right next to each other, observing this same external phenomenon, and have totally different perceptions of what is happening in that reality. People at a football game, watching the same game, have totally different perceptions of what's really occurring. Yet they're watching the same game. That's because there is no way as human beings that we can experience any objective reality. Everything is filtered through our perception. And our perception is determined by the ideas in our head that we have learned, that we've inherited. Maybe we've come up with a few original ideas, although there are very few original ones in the world. This is why eyewitness accounts of crimes are so unreliable, because the perceptual lens through which any bystander experiences as real, in other words, the crime that they witness, is altered by their own meaning derived from their own past experiences. Things like family learning, conditioning, the opinions of our friends and others that we adopt as our own. So someone gets hit by a car, and in 1.7 to 2.2 seconds, the observer, the bystander, has layered generations of thought and absorbed meaning onto that occurrence, which then skews their experience of what happened. Whenever we tell a story, we're not actually telling something that is what actually happened. We're actually just telling our perception that we experience as real of what happened. And this is a profound problem, because so many of us get so attached to our perception of real, and we almost like stand on it as though we've got a corner on reality and everyone else doesn't. None of us have a corner on reality, is the truth. All ideas and perceptions are just that, our own ideas and perceptions. And here lies the problem I want to address today. All ideas, and therefore the perceptions that result from those ideas, aren't equal. Some ideas, and therefore some perceptions, are more worthy than others. Just because you have an idea doesn't mean you need to act on it, doesn't mean you need to share it, and doesn't mean that it needs to be acted upon. We often confuse the inherent and essential equality or the value of being of human life, that all humans are equally worthy and important. We often confuse that with the values of the ideas that one person has over another. All human beings can be considered valuable and worthy and equal, but that doesn't mean all human being ideas and perceptions must also be equally valued and considered worthy. All humans may be equal in terms of their innate value, but not all human ideas and perceptions are equally valid. Here's an example. Adolf Hitler's perception of reality and his view that the Jews were the reason for Germany's problems was not a worthy idea or a resulting worthy perceptual experience of reality, and should never have been acted on. But it, like other faulty perceptions, was acted on, and it rippled out into the Second World War. Now, I know this is an extreme example, and I use it simply to make the point that not all human ideas, and therefore perceptions of real, because there is no real we can actually grasp, are valid. But each and every day, All of us have ideas that color and determine our perception of what we experience as real for us. Someone cuts us off while we're driving our car, we lash out, and we take offense, and we tell ourselves a story about how that prick in front of us did that on purpose to us, like our ego gets hurt. In our relationships, we make our partner wrong for not doing the dishes or working too much or not being available to service our needs. This is a very egocentric perspective, which most of us come from at our lowest operating level. Our ego is hurt. Our egocentrism is not honored and placated. And so we tell ourselves a story about how we've been wronged. Indeed, we spend much of our lives telling stories to ourselves and to others derived from ideas that randomly just pop into our mind and that we then act on by first allowing to become part of our perception of what's really happening. So that's irresponsible. Our ideas that pop into our head should not, most of the time, be incorporated into our perceptions of real. And yet few of us question whether our ideas are worthy of articulating and bringing into existence through that articulation, just like Hitler. Not all ideas, and therefore perceptions of reality, are equally worthy and valid. When we're operating from a place of ego, we're unconscious of the fact that perhaps our idea is actually just simply a bad one and should be left to dissolve in the recesses of our mind, versus manifesting that idea into reality through conversation and beyond. When you really consider this, we speak way too much in our day-to-day life because we usually are just articulating ideas that are popping into our head, and we create lots of noise for ourselves, but we also create scenarios where our ideas ripple out, other people hear them, and then they have an idea that reacts to the idea we've just articulated, and before we know it, we're creating, because that's all that creation is manifesting ideas into some form. And we're irresponsible in our creation because actually we're just articulating random thoughts. When we let our ideas move from idea to opinion, which means that we're now attached to that idea, that's all an opinion is, we've now created a framework through which we interpret phenomenon and layer our opinion as meaning on top of the thing that happened. And because so few of us question the source of our ideas and where they come from, and therefore assume our opinion is, based in reality, we end up in this vicious egotistical cycle where thrusting our opinion on others and defending it to be right, not like that's even knowable, becomes the hill we die on, or risk our identity, because we've attached our identity to our opinions and our perceptions, all of which become as an idea in our head and was conditioned by our mental environment. And that mental environment we inherited or we learned from others who invested their ideas into us, and also themselves got attached to their opinions, and etc. And here we go. So we have an idea. The idea is probably not original. We inherited it from conditions like our family upbringing, the community, our friends, that kind of stuff. We've taken other people's opinions and adopted them and got attached to them as though they are their own, and none of this is original, and none of this is tied to what we really value. And yet we are acting on these things as though it's real. We find ourselves very quickly in a strange loop of believing that we understand reality and our relationship to it in our own lives, when all of it is a complete illusion of the mind of our own creation, inherited partly and randomly generated in another sense. In the case of humans, we like to think of ourselves as thoughtful, intentional people who give consideration to all the variables that might impact a decision, but this is not the case unless you develop the skills to thoughtfully and meticulously evaluate the thoughts that arise, the ideas that arise in your mind, and construct intentionally an opinion based on that and based on the information you gather. Unless you educate yourself about all of the possible variables that would impact your opinion, and unless you clear out your mind of bias and conditioning, which takes lots of work, something that is possible but requires thousands of hours of being-based work, personal reflection and contemplation. Unless you do that work, your ideas are just random or inherited and are not worthy, usually, of even being articulated or acted on. People say to me often, I'm allowed to have my opinion. Sure. No more than an infant is allowed to have their opinion. But an opinion that hasn't been challenged, beat up, and well thought through, attesting to all other possible perspectives, and having provided those perspectives equal weight in your thinking, because you are conscious of the fact that an opinion is not a truth, it's a perception, and is usually skewed and biased. Unless you do all that work, it's not really an opinion worth having or even acknowledging. Opinions that don't come from that level of work, these so-called opinions, are really just egotistical off-gassing and whims. You're just articulating something that pops into your head. And those are not ideas that are worthy of sharing with the rest of the world. We all have that going on. It just creates the noise and the clutter and the chaos that many of us are experiencing these days. And yet, it's precisely such neophyte opinions that are at work in much of what we experience in our lives. Decisions that affect billions of people are the result of simpleton opinions. Not challenged, not vetted, not confronted internally for their validity. Not backed against any other verifiable data that we can integrate into our thinking. Kind of like the idea of burning the rainforest down to grow soybeans and cattle for fast food restaurants. This inherently is a bad idea because it is sourced only in the egotistical machinations of a few people's minds, yet serve their own selfish needs without considering the impact on billions outside of their perceptual worldview. We all get and have empathy for the fact that Brazilians need to make a living and survive. But there are other ways of doing it that can also protect the planet. But these alternatives are not being explored because someone wants their ideas and opinions to be the reality, for no other reason than satiating their own ego and maintaining power and control within the existing broken system in which they're operating. Again, this is just another example that I present because it's current. But we all do this. Whenever we aren't being intentional about the outcome that we're committed to seeing to manifest, and from which our values come, whenever we're not being present to how our brain thinks, how it thinks us, until it doesn't, because we'll always choose to operate from unconscious habit because it's easy. Or whenever we're coming from this place of, well, it's always been done this way as sort of like a reason, This is all just a simpleton mindset. Just because something's always been done this way or an idea is old doesn't mean it's a good or worthy idea or that it's the best way to do something. That's simpleton logic. We need to teach ourselves, and this requires discipline and practice, to be focused on being methodical and deliberate and open to the possibility that we're not seeing everything as we need to, that others have equally different ideas that color their perceptions of what's real. Because everything is biased and skewed, since everything is our own perception and none of it is objectively real. So how crazy is it that we get into arguments about perceptions? So I'm encouraging everyone to acknowledge that they don't know, and that what they think they know about the world, themselves, the nature of being, and why we're here is all inherited stories that have formed our perceptions. None of it is real. Everything that you experience as real is an invented thing from someone else's mind that preceded you. I'm here to encourage new, original thought that's based on what you value. It's time that we put everything we think we know to the side and get really centered around what do you and me as individuals truly value in our life. I know you value your family, your friends, your health, and those moments of joy and happiness. Do your opinions that you clutch so desperately to in order to be right and to satiate your ego, do they actually deliver you your friends, your family, your health, your joy, and your happiness? Or are they momentary mental payoffs that make you feel good in the moment, but alter nothing in the totality of your life? I know it's the latter for all of us. So we need to slow down, stop acting on ideas that just randomly pop into our heads as though they're real things or are objective experiences of reality. They're not. Stop holding on to our opinions as though they are the truth and that our life depends on it, on defending them, because they're not. What our life does depend on is our health, which requires clean air, clean water, chemical-free food, time spent loving those in our lives, and working together with others to help each other along this otherwise lonely existence we call human life. For without our health and without others, we are nothing. No money or houses or cars or all the shit that we consume to satiate us momentarily when our ego needs attention. None of this brings us joy or happiness. We don't truly value those things. It's time that we got really in touch with our values, what our real values are. Not your political ideology, not your religious dogma that you're attached to, but what you really value as a person. And from there, you evaluate each of the ideas that pop into your head before you even form an opinion around them. If those ideas that are popping into your head are not tied to one of these few simple values that are common across all human beings, of whatever political affiliation or religious affiliation. Those are the important things to anchor ourselves to, and by doing that, we will reduce the friction and the battling that all of us think we've got corner on absolute reality and what's true. No one does. And as you simplify in that way, getting realigned with your values and trying to look for what others share in terms of value systems with you, we'll find a lot more joy and happiness. We've all allowed our brain to become cluttered with random ideas that either generate in our own head or we've learned from friends or family. And none of that is the truth. It's all created bullshit. So I'll leave you with this. Take some time to sit and to really try to get clear. What do you really value in life? Like what's critical and essential for your existence, for your happiness, for your joy, for your well-being. You'll find that most of the stuff you think is important is not. Or as my colleague in our workshop, themostimportantconversations.com, as my colleague Anurag says, we often confuse our life to be at risk when it's really just our lifestyle. Things that give you a lifestyle that seem to make you happy, much of that is actually detracting from your happiness because you've confused your life being at risk with your lifestyle being at risk. When we get reconnected to what we really value, to our values, those basic fundamental and foundational values, we realize that much of the stuff that we've wrapped around ourselves that constitutes our lifestyle is not only not necessary, but is actually creating the negativity and the stress and the anxiety that we thought it was going to help us remove in the first place. For those of you who want to dig deeper into this type of conversation and this type of work, I encourage you to sign up today for free at themostimportantconversations.com for one of our free upcoming fall being experiment workshops. They're online, so you can participate from the comfort of your own home, and they're free through till January 2020. Thank you all for listening. I hope this was informative and at least gives you something to think about. I'll be posting regularly going forward. Get reconnected to what's important to you.